Many times when people are talking, we are immediately thinking about how we are going to respond. We may hear the beginning thing that they say, but then we immediately switch to be on our own head to think about how can we properly respond to this versus hearing additional critical information. Welcome to the Your Next Move podcast. Today, this is a solo episode where I'm going to give you an insider's look into one of my probably most popular workshops on communication. We talk about communication time and time again. And in 2016, Harvard Business Review found that 69% of managers are uncomfortable communicating with their employees. If you have managers who don't know how to properly communicate, your staff will not know how to properly communicate, you won't solve problems effectively. It is critical to the success of your career, your business, everything. But today, I want us to think about communication styles similar to how we think about the five love languages, right? When we think about the 5 love languages, the goal, if you have not read the book, The 5 Love Languages, it is amazing when you are in partnership or looking to be in partnership to understand yourself and understand your partner. There are 5 love languages that essentially tell you how you like to be loved. And the biggest misconception in love is that you are loving someone how you'd like to be loved versus how they would like to be loved. So for example, I am words of affirmation and physical touch. If you are not hugging and touching me and telling me that you love me, I will not feel it. So naturally, when I'm dating, I'm someone who's very expressive and I'm someone who likes to touch. I'm generally holding hands, touching, kissing. That's generally who I am. However, if I'm dating someone who is acts of service, where they want you to do things for them, so put their clothes away or help them pack their suitcase when they're traveling, that's not how I naturally express love. So they may be saying, I don't think Kim really likes me like that. And they're over here trying to pick up my house or put gas in my car or something, doing acts of service. And I'm like, just touch me and sit down and rub my back. It's not working together. In the workplace, communication can work the same exact way. I'm going to break down 4 communication styles, and I want you to keep yourself in mind and your team and your managers, because we want you to think about it in the same way, understanding who you are and how you receive information and how others around you also need to receive information. So if you want to get your pen and paper out, now is the time. There are 4 types: analytical, functional, intuitive, and personal. So kicking it off for analytical, and this is exactly what you think it is. These are the people who want the raw, hard facts, clearly defined. They want hard numbers, specific language. They don't want anything being vague. An example I give is you're like, hey, the sales were up this quarter. They're like, up by how much? By who? How did we get there? They want the charts, the graphs, all of the things. They're generally very logical. And you could feel like they're also unemotional. Sometimes they can come across as cold because they need that quantifiable data when having conversations. So when you're working with these folks, it's important to provide details up front, set clear expectations, and give them space to work independently. They need to go through that process to quantify all the things. You also want to avoid using things like I think, I feel. Like, you don't want to use those type of statements with them because they don't care what you think or what you feel. They want to know what you know, what is true. How can you quantify whatever it is you're saying? And also avoid framing feedback as criticism. Remember, keep these folks in the hard, cold facts. Next up, we have our intuitives. These are our big picture thinkers. They're on the opposite side of the analytical folks. So they thrive on the big ideas. They don't really care about the necessary order of things. They want you to get wrapped up in the vision. You'll see a lot of leaders. Imagine your town hall at your company and the CEO gets up and they're telling you about the vision for the company. This is the 10-year vision that's going to take us into the next millennium. We've all seen those presentations. that person is able to paint the ideal state of where the organization will be. Now, they're not talking about how it's going to impact your work. They're not thinking about those details, but they want you to think broadly and get swept up in the magic of their vision. These are intuitive folks. So when you're talking with them, try to stick to the main topic. Keep it high level though, because they can go all over the place. They don't want to be in the details, but keep it high level, broad strokes. Be prepared to have them ask follow-up questions, but keep those details to a minimum. There's someone who will probably do really well with a follow-up email. They want to see the details later, but in that meeting, they again want to get swept up in the idea. Obviously, with these folks, avoid too many details and making promises that are too big. Because if someone is big on vision and you share this grandiose idea, they may hold you to that. So just be careful about making too many promises that could be a little bit out of scope or stretch you a little bit too far in these conversations, especially when presenting new ideas. Next up, we have our functional folks. These people like process. So if you're a project manager, you are probably a functional thinker who communicates in that way. You want step by step, you want timelines, you want thought through details. You want to know what's happening from start to finish, and no detail is overlooked. You put the plan together most of the time for your organization to be able to drive forward, because you can think of everything that other folks miss. You also want to try to practice active listening with these folks. When they're talking, you have to really be engaged because they're going to go through every single detail. And if you're talking to them, expect them to ask you for the details. Brainstorming is great with them, but when we're talking about intuitives who have that big picture vision, a functional thinker is going to come in, okay, how are we going to make that happen? How much headcount do we need for this? How are we going to plan for this? What is the timeline? The functional person will come in with all those questions to make sure that you're not going too far to the right or too far to the left. With these folks, you want to avoid rushing to get to the end or to a decision. They need all of the details. They're not going to move until they understand the full scope of whatever is happening. And also, you don't want to assume that they support an idea 100% because these folks may need another second just to think about it. A second to poke some holes in whatever you presented or talked about to make sure that it's actually something that can be executed. So last but not least, we have our personal folks. They value relationships, connection. That is what thrives. It makes them thrive in the workplace. They're generally great listeners. They're a great diplomat. They're good to smooth over things on a team. Many times you may hear people refer to them as the glue on the team because they make sure that everyone is working well together. They generally have a really, really high emotional intelligence in the workplace because their strength is building relationships. So with these folks, you want to try and keep the conversations light and casual. These are not the folks where you walk into a meeting and be like, all right, let's get into the agenda today. They want to hear, what did you do this weekend? It was your kid's birthday. What are you doing next weekend? How are you feeling? Did you try that new coffee spot around the block? You need to do a little bit more of that relational piece with them. They want to hear statements like, I feel. They want to hear personal stories. They want to feel more deeply connected to the work. Going into the hard, cold facts would be an immediate turnoff to this individual. For them, avoid talking down to them or being overly pessimistic. They're generally very optimistic people when they're communicating. They don't just want to hear all the facts, and they don't also want to feel pressured into diving into the details too quickly. Again, for them, relationships are everything. How it's going to impact in the workplace is key for them. So, high-level overview again. So for analytical, this is the questions. Where's the data coming from? How do we know this? Are we sure? For our intuitives, where is this going to get us? What's the bottom line or the big picture? Intuitives want to skip to the end. So what's the end result of doing all of this? They'll let the functional person figure it out. And the functional is more like, what's the process? What happens first? How long is it going to take? How many people do we need? And the personal is all about the feeling words. Who's going to be involved? How do you feel? What do you need? How is this going to work and impact everyone? So I hope that in hearing this, it can help you really understand who you are, but also who are all the other people on your team. One of my favorite quotes is from George Bernard Shaw. The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. I'm gonna say it one more time. The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. Many times you could be talking, but it is coming in and going out and nothing has happened because we're not using the communication style that helps that person understand. I talk a lot about creating and presenting strategic ideas with my clients. And when you're presenting a new idea, when you're talking about getting a new role, you have to communicate to get buy-in. So it's not enough just to communicate how you want to communicate. You have to understand, how is this information going to best be received? We think about parents and children, right? I was one of those kids. I still don't eat vegetables. I didn't eat them then. I don't really like them now. But when you hear all these things that parents do to put vegetables in tomato sauce or make spinach brownies or whatever it is, they have to hide to conceal to make it palatable to a child to want to eat so they can get the nutrients that they need. Think about your work in the same way sometimes. You know the idea that you have is great. You know that you want to bring this into the world. So how does this need to be presented so it can be received with the intent that you have? And sometimes it may stretch you completely out of your comfort zone. One of my biggest examples about my weaknesses is that I am not an analytical individual. I've said time and time again, put me in Excel and you will see real tears. That's what happens. I don't do pivot tables and all of that stuff. Now, do I know how to do it? Yes. Is it a strength? Hell no, it is not in any way, shape, or form. But when I am working with an analytical leader, I know I have to stretch myself to make sure that I have that information if I want my idea to go forward. Many times our ideas are not accepted because we're not giving the information that that person, organization, whoever it is needs in order to feel comfortable and buy into who we are or our idea. This also happens in the interview process too. When we talk about interviewing, and I have a few podcasts on interviewing I can link here too, it's all about speaking in a way that allows someone to best understand your experience. And now in an interview setting, you won't have the opportunity to understand every single communication style in front of you. But that's why we use tactics like the STAR method to really tell a story that touches on several different pieces of what's needed in the communication style. So if we think about STAR, situation, task, action, result, the situation could be seen as functional. Where was I? What was I doing? How long? What was happening? The task, what were you actually charged with doing? That can hit on the functional and sometimes the analytical. The result is definitely with actions, sorry, I missed one. The actions is definitely on the result side. Like, what were you doing there? How did it feel? A little bit intuitive. And the results, again, we're hitting back to analytical. And that whole time you're bringing people along with you because you have to make it clear what your contribution was versus everyone else's, which would be the personal side. You're literally touching on that when you're telling stories. But in the workplace, you have a little bit of an advantage because you should know everyone who you're speaking with. So before we wrap today, I have 5 keys to effective workplace communication. Before I let you go, to make sure you can implement this as soon as you finish listening to this podcast, to think about your communication style. So number 1, listen to your peers versus plan for your response. Many times when people are talking, we are immediately thinking about how we are going to respond. We may hear the beginning thing that they say, but then we immediately switch to be on our own head to think about how can we properly respond to this versus hearing additional critical information. Practice taking a moment to sit back before you speak. In your mind, it can feel like eternity if you're sitting there and saying, actually, this is what I think we should do. It can feel like you waited 2 minutes, and I promise it's a few quick seconds that you're waiting. Don't be afraid to take a second to really hear everything that they're saying. Take a moment and then reply effectively. Number 2, know and plan what you'd like to say and why. When you're walking into meetings, think about who is in that meeting. How are you going to contribute? Who are the stakeholders, and how can you properly put together a communication plan to speak to the people who are in that room? Especially for my introverts, sometimes extroverts can quickly raise their hand. They're good at thinking on the spot, jumping right in. My introverts may take a little bit more planning, and that's okay. When you're going into meetings, one of my secrets to make sure that you're being seen and positioning yourself as a leader is to plan. What is that key question you're going to ask? What is the key idea that you want to share? How can you contribute in that way? Number 3, remain conscious of body language, facial expressions, and your tone. So much of how we communicate is unspoken. Yes, how we literally verbally say things is important, but your posture is important, how you're standing, your facial expressions. All of that is so key. And in a digital world where we're on Zoom and we literally just see this box of each other all the time, we think that we may not need as much of that anymore, but it really is key. We are going to be talking about body language this season to give you some quick tips that help you exude confidence and also just remain open. Number 4, deliver your message in the appropriate context and environment. When we're thinking about communication, it's the words that we're saying, but what is the timing? When is it best to present new ideas? What does the schedule for the day look like? All of these things matter. Sometimes it's best to get someone bright and early at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning. Sometimes it's really good to get someone on a Friday afternoon so they can mull it over on the weekend. When is the best time to have this conversation? Is your question appropriate to ask in a group setting? Or should you really catch someone one-on-one? Should you be in an office setting where you're pulled off to the side and it's super private? Or is it okay for it to be super casual at your local coffee spot as you're walking in between meetings? What is the environment and context that is appropriate for your ideas for this conversation to be as fruitful as you'd like for it to be? And last but not least, communicate to receive understanding, agreement, or consensus. Many times we're communicating sometimes to win. Winning is not always the answer. Sometimes we need to make sure that we are understood, we are heard, we have agreement on next steps. Even if we are agreeing to disagree, that's okay. But sometimes the goal of communication isn't just to drive our point home. So with that, y'all, I hope that this was helpful when you're thinking about your communication in the workplace, because we all know it is crucial to your success, the success of your team, and the overall success of the company. May your next move be your very best move. Have a great day, y'all.